here, Jean Truelove from Truelove Quilts for You. What is behind me? If you've been following, I have been working on my Dresden plate quilt, and it is finished. The next little bit of video coming up is me binding my quilt. As you know, my last video, I was choosing my binding. And I must say I got quite a lot of comments about people saying they would have liked to have seen the backing as the binding fabric. And it was really a close call for me. In the end, I did choose my green and white stripe, which you will see me putting on, me cutting in and putting on. You see me do that a million times. But this is my finished quilt. I rounded my corners and I put the green and white binding on it. And I say at one point, there are no tucks. There's a minuscule little tuck, one little tiny little fold on the back of my quilt. But because the way I pin base, like I say, I don't get many tucks or folds in the back of my quilt. But as I was cutting away all the threads, I found just a teeny little fold. Funny. I don't care if it had tucks in it anyway. Who cares? It's on the back of my quilt. But I'm really thrilled the way it turned out. It is a beast. I'm hanging it up here. It's going to go in our other room. I just really love it. I really love it. So this tutorial, a little bit to follow, is me binding my quilt. But I also, as I do, you know me, ramble, random also. I also have I wanted to show you a few of my other Dresden plate quilts. So this is a little bit of a show and tell. I've actually done tutorials on my little wall hangings, and then I made a quilt, and I just wanted to share with you how I actually quilted the Dresden plate itself. You've seen me the last 6 videos or so quilting this particular Dresden plate, but how I did my other ones. I've made quite a few Dresden plates. They're awesome. Actually, I just went to get it. I turned my camera off, and it's a wrinkled mess. I had made this last year, this quilt, which is it's called a fractured Dresden plate. I've screwed it up, and it's a wrinkled mess. And everybody was saying, or when I was showing it, I didn't do a tutorial on it, but people were saying, how did you do that plate in the middle? And I just got it out. I just saw it over there. Like I said, it is a wrinkled mess. I have yet to finish it. I don't think I finished it. No, I don't think I finished it. Or did I? Oh, I forget. I forget if I finished it or not. But anyway, you're going to get sick of Dresden plates, but I might show you how I did that, if I can figure it out. I just realized I forget which template I used. But you obviously, you just make a strip set, you cut it, and then you reverse it. And then it comes out like that. So I just saw this over there, and I thought I'll just pull that out since I'm doing a bit of a show and tell. This is dramatic. I really like it. No pattern, and it was a little bit skewed. It really, I tout like, oh, my quilts are always square. This was so not square because I just cut out hunks of triangle. You can't do that. That's where quilt math comes in, and I don't know how to do that. So for these large triangle pieces, I just started cutting huge, great triangles, trying to make it fit. And then I had to cut it down to try to make it square. But it's pretty. It's really pretty. So I might actually be quilting this next. Because as you know, I don't like to have any unfinished projects. And it's pretty. It's really pretty. I did this right before we were going to move, or as we were going, what was it? When we were started to move. And as you know, that was quite traumatic for me. And I sort of made this nervously and then put it away. Anyway, so that's that. There's a little bit of a show and tell. Now let me see if I have any things. So there's a show and tell coming up, the binding, whatever. Oh, I wanted to tell you, they've started work on the bridge, okay, the last few videos. And our road is closed, okay? And it's only about 100 yards, 150, no, maybe 200 yards up to the crossroads, and then the bridge is down here. And there's 2 houses here, and we're the last house. Well, don't you know it, I think I'm going to have 6 months of people turning around in my driveway. Sure enough, road closed, barricades, and only to homeowners, which is 3 people. And already this morning, I see people come through the barriers, go around them, like, oh, I know that bridge isn't closed. Oh, and they're all turning around in our driveway. It's okay. People, human nature, right? But what I'm holding is, I just wanted to, I got such a kick out of this. I don't know if I'm going to be sharing it. Yeah, I will. As you know, I'm so beyond thrilled at having my little silly channel here, and that people enjoy me or whatever it is that I do in here. Random, right? Random it's going to be. Well, I get so many wonderful comments, and as you know, what my sort of schedule is, and always has been, I sort of come in early in the morning and I read all of my comments, and I try to answer every single comment or put a heart on it if it's just a thank you or something. I always try to answer, and I try to answer any questions, which will be my next little thing, question and answer. But for right now, I wanted to express my appreciation for all of your beautiful sentiments towards us and our family, especially in this last year. It's been a tough year. It's been a tough year for all of us. But I have to have a shout out to this comment, because I think in the 4 years I've been making my YouTube videos, this had to have been the comment to top all comments. Betty King, shout out to you. This is for my last video, my random video, about the bridge, about my color wheel, about whatever it was I was talking about. This is Betty, quote, "What a glorious, informative, educational, historic color fest of video. Life is good, and all is truly well with our corner of the world. You are our little joy with perfect teeth, a new car, historic bridge, color chart, perfect binding, loving family, and all of us who bow to your genius. Extreme gratitude and joy for the day I found you." Well, Betty, I'm gonna frame that. How wonderful is that? Oh my word, that just really truly brought me so much joy. That's what I keep saying. Let's try to find joy. And if I found joy in the day of Betty King after she watched my video, and a few of you, well then, that makes my day. As I said, it's still tough here in this area. Our county schools have closed again for the next 2 weeks, online only. They had been open, like a hybrid, but the coronavirus here has spiked in this particular county as we speak right now, and right here, really bad state. But here we are in our little corner of our quilting world, bringing joy. And I just wanted to say, before I waffle on too long, I just wanted to say, now I'm sort of tapped out. I might be quilting that, who knows. I've tried to put my thinking cap on for a few other little projects, to fill air time, I don't know. If you have any specific questions, a couple of years ago, Jen and I, in our old home, over a cup of tea and a bit of cake, I had a tea party, we answered your questions. Just one after another, if I choose to answer them or not. And it was lovely. It was a nice question and answer. Jen read the questions, and I answered them as best as I could. But I was thinking that as a couple years on for any quilting, I don't know. I mean, I know how to quilt, but I'm certainly no expert. I do what I do. So if you have any quilting questions or any other questions, you can ask us. You can ask me. Maybe I'll get my husband involved, and I don't know what I'll do. But I was just thinking that might make a nice informative video for us to waste our time with, right? We all need to waste our time and take our mind off of things. So I just thought that question and answer session coming up. Ask me anything. So that's that. I'm going to be doing my video. I'm going to be putting my video up of me binding this, just like I do of me cutting my binding. I did just iron this. I just took it off of my sewing machine and I ironed my quilt. I always iron my quilts, believe it or not, with a nice hot iron. This is 2 layers of batting, as you know, and you're thinking, why do you iron your quilt? But I feel brings back the life of a quilt. It's going to puff up anyway. You're not smashing the batting down when you iron it. Well, when you do iron it, it does, but then it obviously puffs up. But I think it gives a nice finish to the quilt. So I just got it off my on my ironing board, and there's my Dresden plate quilt, all done. And you have followed the process, and I appreciate it. So again, please stay safe, stay healthy. Question and answer. I'll keep you informed as to what's going on our bridge. That's going to be an ongoing thing. And pray it doesn't rain. They were talking about, people were asking about if they're going to dredge the creek once they take the bridge down. Hopefully that is the thing. There must be a million trucks out here. So it's nice and quiet in my little corner of the world. Now it's like beep, 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 all of these construction trucks and people pulling in my driveway. I thought, oh, well, you can't win, can you? So I'll keep you posted about our historic bridge. Again, Betty King, thank you so much. Wow, awesome. Appreciate it very much. All of you, every one of you, my YouTube family. All right, love from the Trueloves. See ya. Bye. Before I start binding my quilt, my Dresden plate quilt, I just wanted to show you this quilt that I had made. I made this ages ago. It's been washed a million times. These are different Dresden plates that I had made, different sizes. And also, I just, for these little circle Dresden plates here, they literally, I just made sort of a little template out of circles, and then just raw edge applique. But as you can see, I love the use of rickrack. And there was no pattern, no rhyme or reason to this. I just started making sort of panels, like this, that rectangle there, that rectangle there, with the different Dresden plates. And then I just sort of sewed them all together, and then every seam there is rickrack on it. The sort of the inside border here is actually two strips of rickrack, jumbo rickrack that you can get, very, very large rickrack, and that's just twisted together. So I have a baby tiny mini rickrack, a medium-sized rickrack, my jumbo rickrack here, and the whole purpose of this quilt was I had gotten this focal fabric. I always speak of a focal fabric, and this focal fabric here, which is sort of these this garland with the egg shapes. I've just pulled the teals into my Dresden plate, the oranges, of course, into my Dresden plate, and the yellows I just pulled into my background fabrics. And as I was saying before about photographing a quilt and being able to see the quilting, the actual quilting, again, if you look to the side, I quilted these plates, these larger plates, with this sort of spiral effect. I started in the middle and I just went right around, and it brings sort of a pinwheel spiral effect to this fairly happy quilt. I did that on all of these, the small, medium, and large ones, and then I just attached, I just sewed rickrack. Again, I just twisted the rickrack to sort of make these flower stems, and then again there's a rickrack in the center here. These Dresden plates here, I made like I did my other quilt, but instead of blanket stitching them, I just stitched them on, just with a straight stitch. I either like blanket stitching or straight stitching. So yeah, so this is again, as I said, just a sort of an exercise in making the plates and then thinking, well, what am I going to do with them? And again, as I said, that's not necessarily Dresden plate. It's just a circle that I made, and then I just raw edge stitched it on. That one has like a double row of rickrack to sort of form the center. This one just has one row of rickrack. I love rickrack, as you can see. I use rickrack extensively in this quilt especially. And then I just free motion quilt echo stitched. But as you can see, this quilt has lots of movement, lots of pizzazz, just with it's funny that there's none of my trademark circles. It's just all echo stitching just around it. I did this about 4 years ago, this quilt. I'm just holding it up on my shelf with these heavy-duty clamps. I don't have a design board. I just use my wall here. Just put them up on clamps. I use the wide border, excuse me, a wide binding on this. And again, I attach this wide binding here, exactly like I did my other, but instead of, I sewed my quilt down, but I stay stitched the edges, but I left the backing and the batting and the top, and then I put the binding in about an inch on the back, and then turned it over and stitched it down on the front. But the backing and the batting are tucked right up to the edge. When you make a binding, that's what you want to be aware of, that your binding is full of your backing and your top and your batting to make a nice full binding. And again, I just used an orange on the back. This is what I was talking about. Here's some other Dresden Plates, little wall hangings that I have, about seasonal fabrics. This is a springy look that I have. This is a wintry look. And then, of course, I have an autumn look here. These are all sort of different. Again, Dresden Plates. I have a tutorial on making this one and my wintry looking one. This, again, this is a larger blade with a point, which I blanket stitched on, and I just added a few leaves. And to make it look like a sunflower, I just did a very heavily circled, stippled, variegated thread in that brown, if you can see that, to sort of imitate the sunflower seeds. But as you can see, that thread that I like is purples and fuchsia and blues and greens. But at a distance, you always look at a fabric from a distance. What does it read? It reads a brown solid. But you get up to it and you're like, oh, it's pretty. And then, of course, again, these are just little wall hangings. This one has autumn apple baskets, apple carts, pumpkins. Awesome. This is my little springy one. Now this Dresden plate, I used a round top that I did have to cut each one of these. These aren't sewn. This is cut with the round top. And then I did blanket stitch. That's a raw edge. I did blanket stitch them on. And again, no pattern or anything. And then I do, as you know me, I do love my checkerboard, or little tiny, you know, squares. And then I just did a free motion quilting. That was a stencil, the little feather corners in that one. And again, that's sort of like a springy, sort of a sweet, like reproduction fabric, 30s fabric. And again, on that center circle, I just did sort of concentric circles. And then this one is wintry looking, and I did like the holly leaves in here. And this is just basically red and green, picking up the red and green of the hollies and the poinsettias there, but alternating it, as you can see, green, red, green, red, green, red. But I have pinks, dark burgundy purples, but from a distance it reads red and green. So anyway, there's some of my Dresden plates. You can see I like my Dresden plates. They're so much fun. Once you get a template, small, medium, large, whatever, they're very simple to make, very easy to make, and I think are just delightful. I decided on this green and white stripe. This is a Waverly fabric that I got. Beautiful, lovely. I got quite a few yards of it. What I'm doing is I'm putting actually two lots, the two ends together, so I can cut two at a time. Now, as you know, if you've been watching me, you know I love my Fiskars ruler. But I also, my Fiskars ruler is a rotary cutter. This is not my Fiskars ruler. I'm just saying my Fiskars ruler, which I have touted, is a 6-inch by 24-inch rotary cutter ruler combo. This is from So Easy Cutter Ruler, same principle. It's 4 inches wide. It's 4 inches wide by 26 inches long. So it's a little bit narrow and shorter. I've had this one forever. Both of them are awesome. I love my Fiskars, and I had just found this one. My Fiskars is buried over there somewhere. So I'm using this. It's So Easy. what does it say? Designed in Australia, cutter ruler, code NL4186, whatever that means, but it's so easy. Now what this is the ruler that the ruler is to here, to this edge here, and then when you push down the red slider, the rotary cutter is in there, but you never ever have to come in contact as this rotary cutter to open and close with the cutter. That's why I like it when I'm cutting long bits. So this one is in particular because it's that much longer. So what I have done is I have laid out my fabric here, right on my my mat here, my very bottom, both layers. As I said, I have 2 layers of folded fabric here. And I already have trimmed up that side there. I've already trimmed up that side. And I'm going to bring my ruler down. It's very easy because the lines on this ruler, I can just make it nice and square on my stripes. So I'm not cutting my stripes a bit wonky. Now, again, if any of you have been watching me, you know that I like the 2 ruler method to get my cuts. There's so many ways that you can cut fabric. Some people cut it over this way. Some people cut it over this way. Some people use the markings on the mat. I never do. I like to use another ruler. So what I do is I know that this edge here of my cutter is where my blade is going to cut. So I cut my binding at 2 1/4 inches. All right, I cut my binding 2 1/4, and then I will fold it in half, and I will then I will iron it in half and then attach it to the back of my quilt. So what I do is I find my 2 1/4, which is right there, and I come down here, and just hair by hair, I make sure that the top is measured 2 1/4 and the bottom is measured 2 1/4. And then with a firm pressure, my rotary cutter blade is down there, and I have cut off, I have cut off 2, it's only because I can't reach, 2 perfectly square and lovely straight 2 1/4 inch sashing bindings. So I'll just continue this. And as I said, I quite like, I'm not quite as tall. So this bit up here. And now let me just tell you that, I'm going to stand on my tippy toes. There we go. There we go. I have had this one for a couple of years. I've had my Fiskars, Fiskars, rotary cutter ruler combination. I've had it for 7 or 8 years. I've never changed the bleed. Ever, ever, ever. And this one I've never changed the bleed. I don't know what it is, but look at those lovely cuts. Right there's two cuts of binding. Again, I'm measuring my 2 1/4, hair by hair. Not touching I'm not touching the blade whatsoever. I love these rotary cutter rulers combinations. I love them. I do know that you can get them on Amazon, and you can also get them at Joann Fabrics. Even Walmart has them. If you have a coupon, sometimes they're on sale. But I just love them. They make, with my 2 ruler method, I get nice accurate cuts. And there you go. I just love them. Let the tool do the work. So I'm cutting my binding strips. Oh, how many have I cut? 1, 2. How many do I need? Oh, flipping heck. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's funny. 5. I think I have enough. I got talking. Oh boy, oh boy. Yeah, I think I have enough. Isn't that funny? I just kept cutting. I forgot I was cutting 2 at a time. So that's good. So I cut all my binding strips. So I'll fold this up, put it back on my comic book boards. Again, let me just get my comic book board over here. This is how I fold my fabric. I love to use my comic book boards. A lot of people are like, how do you fold your fabric? So I just fold it in half like that, and then I just start to put the just fold it over like that, and boy oh boy, sometimes I tuck that in, And there is my nice, neat, tidy package. And right there's about 5 yards of fabric right there, actually. So look how nice and neat. And then I'll just put it on my shelf like that. Cut all my binding, tons and tons of binding. And what I have to do is I'm going to connect my binding strips. Now, sometimes you would think the easiest way to connect stripes is to just have a continuous, strip connecting, finding your, green, white, and then stitch, stitch there, which is you could do that. By all means, you could make a straight stitch across for your binding, but I do like to do a bias seam on my binding. Now, when you have not a stripe, it's very simple. You just, with this selvage a bit up there, you would just sew from this point down to that point there. Well, we basically can do the same with a stripe. You just have to be a bit careful. If you would do it this way and find your stripes, which is easy, when you go to fold your binding in half and then fold it in half again, that straight seam can present just a slight bit of a lump, which isn't a big deal, but doing a bias seam, it makes your seam going, it staggers your seam across the length across your binding. So again, in an ideal world, I would be sewing from this point to this point, but then you think, oh, your stripes are all messed up. So I literally physically just make sure that my binding is straight here on my board, and basically I'm going to visualize, I'm going to do it visually. I'm going to turn this over so my binding, this piece is exactly straight across, okay? But then I see, oh, I have to mess about. See how that's all joggled? It's just a hair, but I'm going to match up my stripes there. Now I'm keeping my binding strip straight that way and straight that way. And there you go. I know that that's a nice bias seam. Pretty good. I know that. This bit is nice and straight, and my bits are going here. So I can see that I've done that green stripe there and that green stripe. So what I will do is I finger press this. It might not be perfect because then when you go to sew it, it might joggle a little bit. But what I do is I just hold that on there. I finger pressed it, and I'm going to just pin this really good at that point, right next to that seam that I'm going to be sewing. I'll just pin it a whole bunch, and then I'll take it over to the machine. Just make that like that. I'll take that over to the machine, and then I'll sew right on my finger pressed line. So then my biased seam, then when I'm sure it's nice and stitched, I can just cut that off, and I'll just continue making my strips. So my biased seam is staggered. So then when I go to fold it in half, I won't have a great lump. Okay, that's how I do my biased seams. So I'll sew all these together and have a million yards of binding. It's so funny. So now what I'm going to do, my next thing is I'm going to curve my corners of my quilt. Now I've put it on my my cutting table here with both corners. Okay. Now as you can see, they're nice and square. But I'm going to just pull this, just put each one exactly square. Now again, by all means, if you wouldn't want to, if you're going to attempt a curved corner, perhaps like here's a circle. Here's a template. You could make a pencil mark or a marker, and you could do a nice curve there, or a plate or something, or a jar lid. I just, because I've been doing this for so long, I literally just eyeball it. The larger my quilt, the deeper I can make a curve. Obviously a smaller wall hanging, I'm not going to do a huge curve, but I'm just gonna start. I start smaller. I usually go back about 3 inches or so, and I go to this point here, where the corner is, and then I sort of turn it back up on myself. So turn it back up on myself like that, and then just finish the curve like that. You have to be a bit brave. So then I end up with a piece that I've cut off, and look how pretty that curve is. Now I've stay stitched it, as it were, on each side. So I've just cut that bit off. I've just cut that little bit off there. But then when I go to put the binding on, what I'll do, I'll just, right before I put the binding on, I'm just going to stitch that 1/4 of an inch just to keep those layers together. As you saw, there's my 4 layers. I'll just stitch that there. But it's like, there's my corner. So now I've done that pretty corner, and I like that. I like that corner. It's not too deep. It's not too big. Then I'll just put my other 2 bits, my other 2 corners together. They're nice and square. And I'll just use this as a template. So they're the exact same size. Just pull this one out. And then I'll just take my sharp scissors. I'll go around like that. And there I have 4 curved corners of my quilt. Like that. That one's just make it a little bit, just take that. Just a nice, beautiful curve. Right there. So now that's as simple. That's what I do, and then I'll just show you how I'll just stitch that down, and then I'll show you how I stitch my binding onto my quilt. I'm finally getting to bind my Dresden plate quilt. What I'm doing is, on whatever side I choose to do it, I go down about 18 inches or so, and what I'm going to do is, with the raw edges of my binding, which I have pressed and folded in half and ironed in half, I'm going to leave, excuse me, about a 8-inch tail, placing the raw edges right at the edge of my quilt, which I have already stitched, as you can see. I'm on the back of my quilt. I'm going to do, oh, I keep having something in my throat. Now, again, if you've seen me do this before, you realize all I'm doing is I'm not pulling my binding in any way, shape, or form. I'm just laying it on the edge of my quilt here, keeping everything perfectly in front of me. My needle is right in the front of my body here. Just lining that edge. Oh, there's quite a lot of frays on this fabric. I don't usually have that. It's funny. So I'm not pulling my binding in any way, shape, or form. Just laying it on there. Now here's where I have a biased seam here. And that way I use the bias, and as I was explaining, that distributes the fabric. Instead of a big lump here with a straight seam, it distributes the fabric over about a 2.5 inch area. So there's no lump. Now I'm coming down to the edge of my quilt, the corner of my quilt, and at about, here's the corner of my quilt, my rounded corner, which I've actually secured, as I said I would in my last step. I've stitched that around. About 7 inches or so away from this corner, around now, as you can see, we just put that like that. Here's my corner down here. I'm making sure that this is perfectly, as it were, it would be square in front of me. Excuse me. I'm going to start really relaxing my binding. I've not pulled my binding whatsoever, as you've seen, but right at this point, I'm going to absolutely, absolutely relax it. Relax, relax, relax. Almost, I always say this, I'm almost pushing it back underneath the presser foot here. I'm not doing that. I'm not pushing it back, but I'm relaxing it so very much. Now, the important thing is, as you see, I have maintaining my 1/4 inch away from this raw edge. I'm maintaining that at all times. Your impulse might be to stitch a little bit wider, because, oh my goodness, I'm going around a curve. Well, you don't want to do that. You want to maintain that 1/4 inch right around this gentle curve here. And again, by doing this, you can go very slowly. I'm easing it, but I'm almost pushing it. Just fabric, like just pinch by pinch, almost pushing it, maintaining my 1/4 inch, pushing this binding back under my presser foot. Maintaining that 1/4 inch at all times, keeping my raw edges together. Must excuse my fingers here. And here's I'm coming around, coming around my. You must excuse me. I just had a Wawa roast beef sandwich. It's got stuck in my throat. So here I am, just coming around this curve. And again, just relaxing that. Do not pull this binding, because if you pull this at this point, your corners are going to cup up, and you'll never even be able to steam them, press them, anything flat. They'll just be a cupped mess. Now, as you can see, I'm fortunate. I sort of gauge that my seam here, my bias seam, is not in this corner here. You don't want that. So you just want to sort of make sure that when you're, it might happen on one of the corners because of the bias. I mean, the way the binding is constructed. But you want to try to make sure that you don't have a seam at your corners. It's a bit of a pain, that, but mine's not. Mine's more on the straightaway. But as you can see, I'm not quite yet done my curve. And again, I'm just sort of pushing that, relaxing it, pushing it back under, and I'll show you why. Now I'm on my straightaway. Again, everything is right in front of me, but I'll just show you. Now, with my needle down, I'll just bring this back. Just bring back what I've just done. And here's my, so tons of, excuse me, where's my scissors? Oh, they're over there. Tons of frays, but anyway, so here's my curve. As you can see, that curves, I really do have to cut some of these strings off. That curves beautifully, but as you can see, that curves just lovely. But on the front, it just, I'm just tucking it. I'm not pulling anything. Look how beautifully that turns over. Look how lovely that bias. Excuse me, this is cut on the straight grain. This isn't even a bias, and I'm doing it around a gentle curve. So many people say, oh, you'd have to do a curve, you have to cut on the bias, your fabric. Your bias is stretchier, obviously, but I have found I do not cut. I bound all my quilts with a straight, with the fabric, straight grain binding, and look how lovely that just turns. That's because I've pushed it and I've eased it. That is the whole thing about doing this binding this way around a curved corner. You just ease it. Now I'm on the straightaway, and I will just continue. Going around the rest of the 3 corners. And I'm just laying my binding, I'm not pulling. So I will just continue my binding here. So I've just finished my 4th corner here, and as you see, sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. I have a seam there, but that's okay. I eased that right around, and because it's on the bias, I know that this seam is distributed around that corner. I did pretty good considering I had very many pieces of binding here that I've stitched together. So now what I'm doing is I can see here that I have my tail from where I began. Let me just put this over here like this. And I'm going to stop. Now, this is going to be a little bit of a tricky part, because you saw me doing the bias seam when I attached it. But I do think, well, I'm going to do it now, but I'm going to do the bias again, but it probably won't match my things probably won't match the way that I do my binding, and that's okay for now. Let me just grab my scissors here. Yeah, I think that I'm not going to be bothered for just a little bit of a joggle, perhaps because I probably won't get this right. My extension table feet keep going up. You must excuse me for messing, but well, there they go. My table was messing up. So anyway, so here's where I began. So I'm just going to come down here just a little bit, and I'm going to just take a few back stitches there, and then pull my threads out. Now, what I do, this is how I do my binding. I'm going to put, oh, it's a big quilt. You must excuse me, I'm puffing and huffing here with this quilt. I'm going to now join my two, and look at all this binding. I'm going to join my binding strips together. Okay, that's all I'm going to do now. Now, this is where I always say you have to be brave. What I'm going to do is I'm going to cut off a piece of binding from my binding that I had. And I know that when this extra piece of binding is the exact size, right? Okay, of my binding. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a pin at the ready. I'm going to make sure that this here is nice. This binding is lovely and flat, not pulled or anything. This binding is lovely and flat, not pulled or anything like that. I'm going to take my binding strip here. That's the actual width. Now, I'm going to put that strip, actually I'm going to cut that off because that's a selvage. So I'm going to just lay this bottom piece like that, and I'm going to place that spacer piece, as it were. Okay, I'm just going to secure that for a second so that's nice and secure. I'm going to absolutely line this edge up with that binding strip there. Now what I'm going to do, everything is nice and laid flat, nothing pulled. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to take my top binding strip, and this is, again, I always say this is where you have to be brave. I'm going to cut it exactly the size, the 2 1/4 inches. I'm going to cut it exactly the size of this spacer piece there. Okay, now I can take that bit out. Now I know that my stripes probably won't match up because I'm going to do it on the bias, but I'm okay with that for now. So now what we're going to do is we're going to do the exact same thing that we did when we actually constructed our binding strips, right? I'm going to take this tail here, I'm going to open it up, if I can. I'm going to open that up like that. I'm going to open up this one, and with the pretty sides together, just like that, I'm going to do the bind. I'm going to sew it from corner to corner. Okay, you can pin it if you want, but I'm just going to sew that from that corner down to this corner, holding everything in place. That's why you need these long tails to make it so it's not that awkward. So I'm going to go from that corner there, press the foot down, and I'm going to stitch a diagonal line right down to this corner here. I have my tripod and I can't get my foot pedal. There you go. So I'm just eyeballing this right down to this corner. So we're cutting this, we're sewing this on the bias. Now, as I say, my stripes probably aren't going to match, but for this bit I'm not too concerned. So I've done that now. Magical, look at that. There's my binding, where I ended it, where I began it. Now, I always do that. I always sort of make sure The raw edges are here before I trim this seam here, obviously. I want to make sure everything fits. So now I just take that off, make sure I'm cutting properly, and just cut about 1/4 inch away, like that. And then I'm just going to finger press that bias seam open. Just going to finger press it. Yeah, my stripes didn't match, but that's okay for just that one. Just going to finger press that, and then in half, because we have this ironed line anyway. So there's my seam, and as you see, it doesn't match, but that's okay. That's okay, just for that one bit. So I'm going to put my needle down, press the foot down, and I'm just going to stitch this binding from the end to where I began. Oh, it's so heavy, huh? Raw edges, and then see how that finishes up perfectly? And there's a little, that's good. Just finishes up like that, perfectly. So my binding is completely on now. So now what I'm going to do, oh my word, this is heavy old quilt here. I'm going to, oops, I'm going to turn it around, turn it to the front, and all I'm going to do now is, my thread came undone. I'm going to, little thumbs, I'm going to start about 6 or 7 inches from the curve right there, and I'm not pulling towards me. I'm not pulling anything towards me. I'm pulling everything out to the side, because I don't want my binding strip to pull. So as you can see there, I'm putting my needle down, and I'm just enclosing this batting, backing, and I'm going to top stitch. Oh, I can't get my, you must excuse me, I can't get my presser foot because my tripod's in the way. Now I'm just going to top stitch this right along the edge there. Now this is a nice way, if you want to have a nice decorative stitch, you can just pull this out to the side like that, and then just roll it around. You could have a nice decorative stitch, maybe like a butterfly stitch, or even a blanket stitch you could do. I always just use a straight stitch, but if you have it, because this machine is just a straight stitch, my Juki, but if I was using my brother, maybe I've done this with a decorative stitch. My top stitching, I've gotten pretty good at it, that when I top stitch on the front, my stitches are pretty even, this line of stitching here. Now, people are probably, if you're just watching this for the first time, again, everything's right straight in front of me. People are like, well, your machine's stitching it. It's fine on the front. That's fine for the front, if you like machine stitched look. But what in the world does the back look like? Well, there's my binding, lovely green and white stripe, and there's my stitching on the front, and there is my stitching on the back. And I always say, yes, it shows. Sometimes it shows and sometimes it doesn't. Well, I'm okay with that. It almost looks as if, I always say that looks like it's machine made, i.e. from a store or something. It doesn't look like homemade. And I've said this a million times, people who can hand stitch beautifully and strong, oh my goodness, more power to you. I'm not good at hand stitching. My stitches are not fine, and they're visible, and I always feel my machine stitching, no matter what it looks like, is much stronger than personally, than my hand stitching. This size quilt would take a few hours to hand stitch my binding, and again, quite a lot of people love that process. I don't. Well, I have the time now, but I've never wanted to. When I started quilting, I absolutely hand stitched my bindings, and I found very, very quickly, oh my word, I can make a quilt in a couple hours, and then I have to sit for, at the machine and then finish it up, and it takes me longer. So I like this method myself. And again, there's the front of my quilt. There's the front of my quilt. My beautiful green and white stripe. Ah, I think it's so pretty. Yeah, I love it. Love it, love it, love it. And it goes so pretty with on the back. Just adds a little bit of prettiness. So, yeah, so I'm just going to finish this up and take some pictures. And, yeah, this Dresden plate will be done. So, my corner to sew my binding on here as I'm finishing up this quilt. And again, I'm just tucking all of this, going slowly, not pulling it towards me. At this point, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to cup that bit. I'm just going to use my hands like this, and I'm just going to cup this binding just to where sort of it wants to go. Oh, this is the corner where I had the seam, which is fine. So you can see, because that's distributed. So I'm just laying it over that, all of that rubbish and I'm just laying, I'm literally just I'm laying the binding down as it wants to curve. You see that? And again, just bite by bite. I'm not pulling it up like that. I'm not pulling it over. I'm just laying it as where it wants to go on this curve as we've sewn it. Just bite by bite. I'm not quite done the curve yet, so I just want to turn it over and just lay it. Needle down, and then I turn my fabric to make it nice, put it in front of me, keeping everything nice and straight. Just roll that over. My batting and my backing, my 2 layers of batting and my backing are tucked really nice into that edge there, right up to the edge. Again, you always want to fill your binding with all of your quilt. You don't want a floppy, loose binding. That's why I like the 2 1/4 inch binding, and it makes this size here, whatever that size is, as opposed to a 2 1/2 or even like a 3 inch, because I quite want to get all of that stuff, all of this batting and backing and quilt top. I want to tuck that right up to the edge of my quilt. Makes the world of difference if you have just fabric, just the binding. It can look a bit cheesy, I think. So you really want to fill your binding. So there, right there, as you can see, I just stitched that corner right down. It's laying beautifully and flat. Yes, you can see the stitching a little bit right there. It's fine with me. Absolutely fine. It's laying beautifully flat. No cupping whatsoever. So all my 4 corners just going to be laying really lovely and flat right around. So, yeah. So I'll just finish up now.